his cousin, Margaret Brennan. We both belong to the Warwick China Club, and we always have our December meetings at my house, and I have a whole game room filled with wheeling down memorabilia, and she suggested that, you know, I present some of the stuff there and that, and I was so apprehensive, and she said, people are really interested in what happened on back then. So anyhow, here I am, and again, I'd like to thank Margaret. What I would like to do is it'll be in 3 segments. The first segment will be is how Wheeling Downs developed and came through the years, and then the next will be about Bill Lias, because everybody associates him with Wheeling Downs. Some of his story I'm going to have to read a little bit because there's so many incidents and things that happened. In my age, you can't remember all the dates and everything. So, and then the last will be my introduction to Wheeling Downs and what I've been through there and the people that I worked with and the different jobs that were over there and different things about the track. So, to begin with, I'd like to start with back in 1769, I know that's a way back, the Zane brothers came to Wheeling, and they made a fortune in land speculation. And Ebenezer Zane, he laid out the original 112 lots that now can constitute downtown Wheeling. The Zane brothers bought Wheeling Island from an Indian chief whose name was Pork Planter for a barrel of whiskey and an old iron chisel. He got a pretty good deal there. The earliest settlers raced around the prehistoric burial grounds around town. The first track specifically built for horse racing was in Beach Bottom in 1806 on a farm owned by Zachariah Humphreys. It's P-U-M-P-H-A-E-Y-Z. And they called him an old-time, peculiar individual. The Virginia Horse Racing Club rented the track each fall. A Methodist minister bought the farm and prohibited horse racing on it. The problem was solved very quickly because they moved it to a nearby farm that was owned by a Methodist named Hedges, and he had no problem with the horse and racing the horses on his land. A second track was the mainstay for racing by 1925. Eccles Field was a 4-mile track in the area known as Richardtown, and that's South Wheeling. Eccles Field closed in 1832 because of the city expansion. The next track was on John Good's farm at the base of Chicken Neck Hill. A company from Virginia ran the track but left 2 or 3 years later because they lost money. Then Major Good opened up a 4th track in 1839 on his property. And racing discontinued because of the fights that happened. There were so many fights after the races and stuff. They didn't go into detail who the fights were between, but there were an awful lot of fights. One guy got hurt pretty bad, so that's when they discontinued, passed the law, discontinued horse racing. And the West Virginia State Fair began in 1881, and it was over there and lasted until 1930. And a grandstand was built there in 1895, along with the track itself. One of the early guys that really got racing started in Wheeling was Henry Schmob. He owned the brewery in Wheeling. And just last week they had a bottle opener from 1910 with Schmob on it, and it went on eBay for $165. But they had a casino out at Wheeling Park, and they weren't allowed to sell beer out there. He was really disgruntled with that. So he bought a whole tract of land up in Mozart, and he put in the dance floor, his own casino, and he had an incline that went up just like the one in Pittsburgh there. And he ran that for years and years, and finally the buses and streetcars started going up there, and he got out of that. But he employed many people there, and he also bought a track up on the bought a a piece of land up on the north end of the island, and he put in his own horse racing training facility there. He built a great big barn, and it was a quarter of a mile track, and he had a lot of people working there. And he also had apprenticeships for jockeys and trainers and stuff so they could learn the trade. But because of the Depression, he got out of that, and the state fair came in, and they also went into receivership. In 1937, horse racing started again at the fair under the auspices of the West Virginia Jockey Club. Wheeling Downs was constructed at that time with private money and was an immediate success until the war. It opened and closed several times during that time. In 1945, Bill Lias bought the Downs at auction for $200,000. Lias had the track for 11 years, and it ended on June 12, 1957. The buyer was John Kelly Group of Philadelphia, but the Kelly Group was out when a group from Hazel Park came in and bid $175 million. Then James Edwards came in. He was the owner of Waterford Park, and he bought the track then, and they had a big fire in 1962 when he had it, and it was the damage was estimated at $1.5 million. And for 5 years, the track sat idle. There was also flooding, the threat of wash away. He had put in a system underneath the track to keep it from freezing in the winter, so he could run races in the winter. But in 1967, the Downs was again a $2 million renovation, and the bulk of the renovation money was placed into construction of the new grandstand. And they did all kind of improvements to everything. And then the new improved Wheeling Downs opened for a 41-day meet on January the 1st, 67, just in time to begin celebrating its 101st year as a racing center. In 1970, Edwards sold Wheeling Downs and 4 other tracks to Ogden Leisure, and Ogden Leisure changed the venue from flat to harness racing, but it wasn't a successful operation. Ogden Leisure closed down the track in 1975 and reopened in 1976 after the West Virginia legislature approved greyhound racing in the state of 1976. And that's when I lost interest in Wheeling Downs. Okay, the next is a brief story of history on Bill Lias. I'm sure everybody's heard of him. He was probably the second biggest racketeer in the United States behind Al Capone. He lived at the McCoy Apartments, which is later changed to the Alice Apartments on 15th Street, 41 15th Street. He was brought into this world by a midwife at home in Alley 15 on July 14, 1900. Years later, the feds would lie about that and try to deport him. At birth, he weighed 12.5 pounds. Today, in his later life, he weighed 400 pounds. He used to average around 368, is what his normal weight was. His father passed away in 1903 when he was just 3 years old, and he was raised by his mother. And he controlled the rackets here for over 50 years. And he always used to like to say is, I'm the guy who supplied the gambling and booze and entertainment to the residents and visitors of our town. I'm the guy who made Wheeling Downs one of the finest half-mile tracks in the country, and the guy who helped to make this into a town that never slept and had a reputation of a wide-open wheeling. I was the man who gave the so-called honest citizens of Wheeling the entertainment they wanted, but never did I get thanked for it. The only thanks I ever got were 4 convictions. And that was for illegal booze, and he served a couple of prison terms. He went to center school down in South Wheeling, and he quit after the 6th grade. And you can imagine how smart he had to be if he were to put his, mind to business. They say the same thing about Alex Manning. If those guys would have been legit, they would have been multi-million, which they were anyhow. But, he only went through the 6th grade. And then his brother had a bakery, and he started working there. And when he got old enough to drive, he would go to Ohio because whiskey and everything was legal there, but the state of West Virginia, they had prohibition before the regular big prohibition. And he would bring whiskey back and needed bread. And his brother got caught, and he took the rap and served 6 months for his brother because his brother was married, whatever. And he said at first he was in business working for others, but at the age of 25 he took over himself. This, of course, led up to the gang wars of the late 1920s and early 30s. This caused some heads to roll and some buildings to blow up. I can remember like it was yesterday that Dick Frank's office coffee shop blew up at 23rd Street. There was only a couple doors from my place, which had been raided a couple days before. I was questioned and released because these bombings and beatings, the city put a curfew into effect on the south side. They would allow anything on the other side of the creek. And that's where prostitution flourished at that time. And it was so commonplace that it was in neighborhoods down there where they would have these houses of ill repute. And the people that lived down there would buy signs to put on the doors so they would know that they weren't houses of prostitution. Beware of the dog and, things like that. And the ironic part of it is in the summertime, the neighborhood kids would go to these establishments and they'd give them candy and soda pop and, treat them like royalty. I mean, never any, sexual activity with the kids. And then at 3:30, when the mills closed, like Bedwood and Wheeling Steel and that, they kicked them all out because they said at that time there were over 5,000 workers there in those buildings, and they were all in town, before they went home to dinner. Let's see. About this time, a couple of his friends were killed in an auto accident. It seems that 4 of my friends were on their way to the Acme Bull Hall in the Grove to deliver a message to our enemies when the car they were riding in hit a steel pole and feet of place. The car was traveling about 70 miles an hour. 3 of them died, and my cousin Mike Russell was seriously injured. The guy was found in the car and had a special compartment to carry 300 gallons of booze. It was questioned but I denied any knowledge. The father of one of those killed blamed me for the local newspapers, but I wasn't driving the car. So he said he had nothing to do with it, which is questionable. The gang wars lasted well into the 1930s and made our homicide rate worse than New York, Pittsburgh, and Los Angeles. It was almost as bad as Chicago where the gun war. And he said, I started to run into some trouble with the law in the 1920s. In 1921, the feds found 2 barrels of mash in a building owned by my brother. Rather than have my older brother go to jail, I took the fall and got 6 months and a $1,000 fine. In May of 1923, I was found not guilty of conspiracy. In 1925, I got 16 months for conspiracy. The biggest sentence was 2 years in Atlanta for conspiracy. Again, in 1931, I was fined $10,000, but never paid it because I was poor. These difficulties were minor compared to later accusations by the government. I can still remember a farewell party my friends gave me the night before he sent to Atlanta. Friends from Pittsburgh, Steubenville, Columbus, Cleveland all came around and we had a roasted lamb and all the fixings, and my pals gave me a diamond-studded gold watch. Before leaving the pen, I put George Seibert and my cousin Mike Russell in charge. George Seibert, had the restaurant out in Elm Grove, and he had one up in Braden's Point. None of you, this is what he said, look old enough to remember the large raid of state conducted on my Fletcher Club in my headquarters next door in May of '34. They were trying to stop my numbers racket, which was bringing in between $750,000 and $1 million per year. If you don't know what the numbers were, it was kind of like the lottery is today. I mean, it was illegal, and there were bookie joints all over. In fact, you could buy a number in the city building. That's how it is. And it was the last 3 digits of the stock market for that day. And why it was so popular, you could bet a penny. And the odds were extra for one number, and the odds were like 600 to 1. So Bill Lias, where he made his money in the numbers, if somebody bet a number and there was a lot of money on it to one bookie, he would lay off that part of that bet to Bill Lias, and he would charge the guy, because if that number hit, it would wipe the other guy out. So he did that for many, many bookies, and that's how he made all of his money. He himself didn't even bother selling the numbers. And when that became illegal, he got into slot machines. And that was the biggest, every place had slot machines. The Elks Club had slot machines. And what was sad about that, a lot of the money, I forget what percentage it was that the Elks made, they gave to the orphanage and different charities around the city of Wheeling. And they came in and closed those down. He said they had 20,000 people playing the numbers daily. And it was because of that business that he ran into trouble with the IRS in 1935. They said he owed $21,900 in income tax for the year 1931. But you remember, they had me in jail at that time. The government said I had income of at least $122,600, or as much as $750,000 in the year 1931. They were really upset that I never filed a return. He said, big deal. 2 days after the trial, Skinny Thornton's home blew up. He was on his way to testify against me. No one was hurt. During the trial was a brought out that I controlled the rackets in northern West Virginia. It was also brought out that I paid graft to Wheeling officials and contribute heavily to election funds. But of course, everybody already knew that. During the trial, I played on the sympathy of the jury. I broke into tears and did admit that I was the kingpin of the numbers racket and had brought back the idea from a visit to Detroit in December 1930. After I was found not guilty, I shook the jurors' hands and ordered taxi cabs for all of them to get home. He said, my trouble with my cousin Mike Russell started after the death of Gladys, my first wife. If you don't remember, she was fatally shot in Chapman Street in the home of Russell in 1934. Gladys had come over to the Russell house to argue with Mrs. Russell over a story she was telling about my wife. Gladys grabbed a revolver from the drawer stand. The scuffle took place. Gladys being shot through the leg, her shoulder, and a third in the heart. She also had a broken nose and deep lacerations. Mrs. Russell was tried and acquitted of her murder. Her murder and Mike's cheating me is the reason we split up. By the way, Gladys's funeral was one of the largest ever held in the city. There were 65 automobiles in the funeral, and it took 4 trucks to carry the flowers. Mike informed his own members that things had split up, and then he goes on about some other activities he had in Steubenville. On August the 25th, some dirty rat shot my cousin Mike in front of his home on 15th Street as his wife watched from the 2nd floor. Whoever did this must have wanted revenge, as the killer stood over Mike and emptied his gun into him. Would you believe that this was only a couple of days before he was to testify against me in my conservation trial? Boy, what a break for me. So, Happy Benanovich, a friend of mine from Detroit, was writing some questions, as was I. It's funny, but Mr. Bonovich was himself shot and killed in a confrontation with one of my men in 1939. The rumor going around the city was that Patty was shooting his mouth off about something he knew about. I was questioned and released after the shooting. Now came one of the best ideas I ever came up with. During 1935, I abandoned the numbers system
business and promoted a bill for the state legislature to have numbers writing a felony. It was at this point I became involved with the slot machines. There was a special secret meeting held in some city official's office during which an open town policy for slot machines was established with a guaranteed revenue for the city. After the death of my first wife, a marriage to Alice Manos of Brooklyn was arranged by the bride's uncles. We would make our home at 41 15th Street for our married life. We filled our home with beautiful fine antiques and china. We had 2 children, Antoinette and George. Both would die during the 1970s. They were both in their 30s. George went to Lindsley and graduated there, and then went up to Ohio State and got his law degree. He was an attorney for those years while he was alive. He also said, besides our home here, we own a mansion in Palmer Woods, a suburb of Detroit, where I had an affiliation with the Purple Gang. Alice was very active in the Greek Church in Wheeling, and at one time served the committee to add on to the church. We loved to spend time in Miami Beach when a retired cop worked as my chauffeur. Oh, by the way, a Wheeling cop fixed the cars of my proprietors of my houses of prostitution. I love the police department. During the 1930s, I heard that Al Capone of Chicago tried to help the poor, which I thought would be a good idea. So I started to give Christmas food baskets and toys to people who needed them. This gave me some very good publicity at the time I needed it most. I also made seed money to start the midget league in Wheeling, and saw that a few Wheeling policemen had new bikes to give to their kids at Christmas. And there's another story. When he had Zeller Steakhouse, there was a very affluent and prominent attorney that came there with his wife for an anniversary party here. It was an anniversary party. And he had a huge sum of money with him. He lost all that money. And then he lost about, I don't know how much, he didn't say. He had 3 or 4 IOUs that he had given to Zellers. The next morning, one of Lias's men came to his office, gave him back all the money he lost in the IOUs. And that's how he got a lot of fingers done in Wheeling. And then during the 50s, he said it was his best, 40s and 50s were his best and worst years. Twice my place called Bill Lias, which was down in South Wheeling, had attempted bombing by my enemies. On one occasion, 12 sticks of dynamite were placed against the 23rd Street entrance, but failed to go off. Another time, one of my men saw a charge of dynamite thrown from the car and pulled the fuse. The best time for when I became the owner of Wheeling Downs for $262,000 at a bankruptcy sale. We immediately invested $500,000 and turned the track into a beautiful racetrack and a real profit maker. And also at that time, they only had enough ground to make a half-mile track. And most of the tracks, as they are today, had 2 tracks, one a dirt track and one a turf track on the inside where the horses would run on grass. And he wanted to make it a mile track. And he went to the Board of Education and offered to buy Wheeling Island Stadium and build them a stadium of any size, any kind, how they wanted it, and put it any place that they wanted to have it, make them do that. So, 3 times he tried to do that. But what he did with that half-mile track was, it brought more people into Wheeling. They had people that came in from Cleveland, Pittsburgh. At those times it was tough travel. He had some of the best horses there, and it was hard for the horses at that time to run on a half-mile track because the turns were so sharp. And they were limited on the distances they could run. They'd run 5 furlongs, 6 and a half, and then up to a mile and an eighth, a mile and 16. A furlong is 220 yards, or an eighth of a mile. So that was they run that distance in a lot of the bigger tracks now, but they'll run 7 furlongs and different distances of that. So it was 113 acres that he had there, and he actually had a city within a city. It had its own 12-member police force. It had gardeners, a doctor, a nurse, sanitation workers, and was one of the largest employers in the city. He also had all the cashiers and sellers and ushers and people in the grandstand and stewards and patrol judges. Then there was a time when Harry Lias, the proprietor of a lakefront restaurant booking, was shot and killed while his wife looked on. The two paid hitmen at his home on American Avenue. That's right, the Boston chicken that killed him. I think this may have been over the furnishing of a wire service to booking joints. I owned the exclusive rights to the service. I sold the service here, not for a flat fee, but a percentage of the joint's business. Harry Lias didn't like those terms, so he secured other services. Once again, I was questioned about but I did not involve him. Then his real problem started in 1952, when he was arrested on being an illegal immigrant in the United States. The government charged that I was born in Greece and entered the United States without a passport on September 14, 1935, while returning from my honeymoon. The trial would cost me a lot of dough and would not be resolved for 9 years. My lawyer was Charles Margagati from Pittsburgh, a brilliant, very expensive lawyer. Some of the most important people in Wheeling would testify on my behalf, including 2 physicians, a former police chief, a steel executive, fire department captain, Wheeling city manager, and a deputy sheriff. Most of them, he said, worked for him. Like the magazine put my picture in, and Coronet magazine did the same thing. What a lousy break. The second problem was another being cheated, tax cheater in 1948. This one wound up costing me my beautiful racetrack in down. I was charged with owing $1,276,000 for the years 1942 through 46, but before it was over, they said I owed $2.5 million. In order to get this behind me, he had 2 prominent congressmen accompany me to the office of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue to work out a deal, which we did, and then had to go before a federal judge who I was friendly with to have the deal approved, and then I would be fined and put on probation instead of jail for pleading guilty. What was nice about this deal was being able to settle for 12 cents on the dollar and to be put on probation to boot, besides income taxes earned for law-abiding citizens. Unfortunately, this all came apart when the judge, there was a senator from Delaware that was very upset that Bill Lias was working for the government. And what he brought out that most people didn't know, they couldn't run the racetrack, and they were losing money. So they hired Bill Lias to run the track for them again. And the President of the United States at that time made $100,000. The Secretary of State made $35,500. At the time Lias had the track, he was making himself $65,000, and he told him that he'd do it for $55,000. Well, they settled on him getting $35,000, which made him the second highest federal employee in the United States. But the end result was he lost his track of Wheeling Downs, and it was later sold to some friends of his from Detroit. I also lost some other small business that I had again. I still owed over $1 million. Well, as he said when he died, I still owed him that money. And the last was in the 1960s. He ran into a little trouble with Paul Hankish of Warburg. It was starting to make a name for himself. I tried to convince him when he had the Pony Club that bringing outside hoodlums into the city would only burn the city up. He didn't listen. On January 18, 1964, Paul Hankish had both his legs blown off in a car bomb. He would always blame me. During the latter part of 1964, Mr. Hankish hired Raymond Freed of New Jersey, mafia hitman, to come to my home and kill me. Fred was called off the job when an FBI agent informed Hankish that they knew of the plot. And that's about the end of Bill Lias. He always to the day he died, he still lived in the apartment there on 15th Street. He was born on July 14th, 1900, and he died on June 1st, 1970. The ironic thing is, when he had his case before the federal government, Bobby Kennedy was the prosecuting attorney. And they had his name, Bill Lias. This was Caucus, Liacakos, a.k.a. William G. Lias. And they were trying to prove that he wasn't, born here in the United States, but they lost the case. How I got to be involved with Wheeling Downs was when I was about 5 or 6 years old. My dad always used to go over to the racetrack. He had the parking lot up at 10th Street there, which is next to the downtown now. And there were big, long row houses across the street. And Bert Evans owned all those houses, plus a lot of other houses in town. And he had no sons or daughters, just some immediate relatives and all. And Wheeling was really, they had people come in from all over the country. And there was the Wheeling Hotel, which is now where George Norman's place is on the corner there, county corner from the Capitol. And right across the street was the Bridge Bar Hotel. And his dad and Teddy Trolls owned that at the time. It was a huge bar went from here down to the end of the river. And people stayed at the hotel, and naturally they had to park their cars somewhere, so they parked in my dad's parking lot. And every once in a while they'd give him a tip, who they liked, or this or that, bottle of wind. And so he and Bert Evans would come over, and he said, "Come on, Hugh," he said, "we're going over the truck and going to spend some more of my heir's money today." And they'd sit in the clubhouse, and he would take me, and I really liked it with the horses and all. And I'll never forget one day, he said, he wasn't doing too well back then. He said, "How about you pick the horses here?" I said, "Really? Want me to pick one?" He said, "Yeah." So I remember to this day, the horse's name was Big Sneeze. And it came in and it paid $10.60. And I said, "Boy, this is really good." I said, "You want me to pick another one?" And he said, "No." He said, "I'm going to give you a bit of advice." He said, "You can beat a race, but you can't beat the races." And one day I proved that wrong. When I was the admissions director over at Wheeling Downs, I was in charge of the people in the parking lot, the ushers and the gate men and different ones. And there was a big outfit that came down from Canada, and they had horses. And they didn't want to park in the regular place over there. And the guy that worked over in that area came over and said, "Mr. Stone," I said, "That's fine. Put them wherever they want to park." So it was about 2 weeks later, and I never forget the guy's name was Mike Passer. And he said, "We've never been to a football game in the United States. We'd like to see how different it is from the game that we play up here in Canada, because the fields aren't like really whatever." So I said, "Sure, no problem. When do you want to go?" I said, "They play, high school plays over here on Friday nights." He said, "Well, can you get us in?" I said, "Well, sure." I knew the guy that worked the pass game there. And I got him in and them in. And it was about another week later, he came to me and he said, "Here," he was over there, and he knew me. Anyhow, he said, "Here," he said, "I'm going to give you a tip." I said, "Well, okay." He said, "They only ran an 8-race card back then." And he said, "I've got 7 horses running tonight." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "Yeah, they're all going to win." They're all going to win. And then he said, "Yeah," he said, "I brought Al Whitman, that's a jockey from up in Canada, who was one of the best up there." And by the way, there's another point. My dad was there, my Uncle Melvin, he worked as a cashier over there. And the other 3 brothers, he had 4 brothers. When the other 3 got done work, they all came over to the track. And I had 2 aunts that were related. Zelma, she was a teacher at Ritchie. She was an old maid school teacher, and she paid big. And she paid my work, and my other aunt, Betsy. And anyhow, so the race started that night, the first race, and I had $125 in my pocket. I remember that distinctly. And the first race, I bet I forget how much the horse won. Second race came, and I well, how about a little bit more? So I got a little bit more hip-hop. And I thought, well, one of these is going to run out. So I didn't bet too much more the next time, hip-hop. To make a long story short, all 7 of them won. And my Aunt Thelma, who I kept giving the horses to bet, like I said, she bet big. She had money in her purse pocket out. There were raincoat pockets and that. She lived in Norwood. I said, Thelma, I'm going to get a cab to get you home. She said, you'll never make it this way. And I thought to myself, boy, this is my night. I think I had close to $3,000 in my pocket. So I thought, well, I'm going down to the Power of Faye. They have a Barbuda game down here. For you that don't know what Barbuda is, it's a dice game. And it's the only legitimate fair game because you got to get somebody else. All the house does is take a rate off of how much money's been bet. So it's not, like I said, a dice game. To win, you threw 2 2s, or 2 3s, or a 2 3. When you lost, you threw 2 6s, 2 5s, or a 6 5. Anything in between 4 2 didn't go as anything. So you'd make the bet. In 45 minutes, $3,000 was gone. I was down to my $125 when I came home. And they said, how'd you do? I said, well, I broke even for the night. But yeah, my dad, over there, I saw a lot of things happen. I saw one jockey get off the horse at the finish line and run over and pull another jockey. His name is Carrillo. Pull another jockey up there, and they had a fist fight right there on the track underneath the finish line. And my dad bought 2 horses. Actually, he paid the feed bill for the guy that had the 2 horses. He was in financial trouble, and that's when my dad gave him a favor. But it was Thunder Lee and Walnuts. And at that time, black jockeys didn't hardly ever get to ride. There was, a lot of racism back then and stuff. But a little guy, he couldn't have weighed more than 90 pounds. His name was Hubert Mckinney. And he came up to my dad and he said, Mr. Stobbs, he said, what he did do over there, he exercised him in the morning. They let him do that, because they, train horses early in the morning. And he came up to my dad and he said, Mr. Stobbs, I'd give anything to let me ride one of your horses one time. Dad said, sure, he let him ride. Well, he won on the first one. And then he was pretty good. He ran, a lot of races for my dad. And it was on Thanksgiving. I'll never forget, my dad got a telephone call, and it was from Hubert Mckinney in Charlestown. And he said, Mr. Stobbs, he said, I'm going to return the favor you did for me. He said, I'm riding today, and they're putting black 99 up on the board. And that meant that's as high as the odds would go. So they had to pay $200 at least. And the black was, the color he was. Anyhow, the horse did come in and paid over, I think it was like $260. So then when I was in charge of the pass gate where you could come in, then you had to pay. I started out in the parking lot, South Broadway, collecting 50 cents on the cars. Because then they charged that, and they charged admission to get in. After the 6th race, you could get in for nothing. And people would line up for the 6th race. And some of Hubert's friends came in, and I took them through the pass gate. They appreciated that. But what I was going to say is with the horses and stuff, they had some really first-class horses that came in. And 3 of the best jockeys were, at that time, was Ray Ballinger, Francisco Sawmill, and Forrest K-Line. Forrest K-Line was what they call an apprentice jockey. And they also called a bug boy, because they put an asterisk behind their name when they put it in the program. They're listed in some of the programs that he is, some of the programs are brought. And what you had to do is, you started out, when you won, you got a 10-pound allowance weight then. So when you were an apprentice, if a horse was to carry 118 pounds, it only had to carry 180. So they got a lot of preference that way. But as soon as you won 5 races, that weight dropped to 5 pounds. And then by the time you either won 40 races or the year was over, you lost your apprenticeship. As soon as you lost 40 races, you weren't an apprentice anymore. But and then he still was a trainer down at Ellis Park, of course, K-Line is, and he went to the big tracks and rode later on. He was the leading rider leading down. He rode there for just 1 or 2 years, and went to, because he was good. And my uncle Belvin that worked the cashiers, and Bill Hogan, I don't know if Bill's here, he's going to try to make it. He was called what they called a runner over there at the tracks. And what the runners did, they didn't have the computer things now. You have tickets. It's like this one over here. And they had to give you a ticket when you come up. And sellers were up here, cashiers were down here. And if somebody gave you a $20 bill and you want a $20 ticket, the seller would call it change, and Bill would come up with change and give you 20, break the 20 point and give you the change. But while he was doing that, if the seller wanted, or if the cashier wanted to buy a ticket, Bill would go down and buy it, take his money, go up and buy the ticket for the cashier. If it won, he'd take the money back to him, and he would take, if it paid, say, $2.60, he'd give him 60 cents. If it paid $20, and if it paid $22.60, he'd give him $2.60. So he ran back and forth cashing and selling tickets for the people that worked with, which was a pretty good deal. And they had a lot of people, but it was tough being a cashier, because you can imagine they had different codes on the tickets. And you had to look at that code. Somebody would come up and give you, say, 5 or 6 tickets on number 5. You had to make sure it was the right ticket. All 5 of the tickets were right. Plus, you had to figure out if it was $5.60, you had to take your own multiplication and do that to figure out how much you had to pay out. Selling wasn't bad because it was always 2-5. And they didn't have all the exotic money that they have now. Over there, all you could bet was a daily double, which was the first and second race. You picked the winner for the first or the second race, and you could buy a ticket that way. And it paid more than a regular. And all they had was win, place, and show. They didn't have like exactly what they have now, where you have to pick first and second place, or a trifecta where you have to pick first, second, and third, or a superfecta, which you pick 1, 2, 3, 4. There were none of those names. Not when they had it, well, not all sets. And that one, you'd say that 1, 2, they could run 2, 1, or 1, 2, and it didn't pay as much as the exacta when you just picked the ones that ran. But what was interesting too, back then, everybody almost wore the spade shoes. You know, they were shaped like a spade on the playing card. And there were people they called them skimmers. And they would take that shoe and they would file the inside of their shoe down to razor thin. And they could walk along without missing steps, tripping tickets over, looking for people that had thrown away good tickets, which happened frequently because somebody would buy, say, a place ticket, and the horse that win, they thought they had to run second for them to win. And they made a lot of money that way. So it was interesting, and I worked there until even after Bill lost the track at Hazel Park. And my boss then was a fellow named Maurice Brown, and he was weird. He was up there in Detroit. I never knew how to read him. But anyhow, I worked over there about 12, 13 years, and I really enjoyed it. And one time when I was a kid, it was a Sunday morning, I'll never forget, and where the parking lot is now, that was where all the stables were, and also they had trailers parked in there. And I heard this loud bang, and I wondered what happened. My dad guy came up and said something. He said, "Come on, we're going home." Here, the jockey's wife, Freddie Meyer, shot him in the trailer with a double-barrel shotgun, cut him in half. And my mother never went over to the races. She didn't really care for it. And when my dad got the 2 horses, he needed a jockey shirt. And he got my mother to make that jockey shirt. I think it was going to be a divorce in the family at that time. But I'll never forget, it was purple and gold with a big S on the back of it. I wish I had it, whatever happened to it, I wish I had it. So that's all I can tell you about Bill Lias and Bill Lias. Feel free to come up and look at if you have any questions or anything.
I have one.
Yeah.
How much of Bill Lias did you see?
Not very much.
No?
Yeah.
Well, he didn't spend that much time at the track.
Oh, yeah, he lived there. You could see, but you could, yeah, I saw him a lot, because at the finish line, he had a hydraulic lift that took him up, and he looked down at the finish line, and the stewards and all, it's in this postcard book that I have there. On the other side was the stewards and the officials, and it was on hydraulic. It was a pretty good size. But anyhow, Bill, you never got close to him. He ran his own horses over there under Royal Navy Stable that made and that caused, that was when he was getting into some financial trouble, and people didn't like that. But, and another thing, over on the island, it was very prosperous for people that lived over there, because the jockeys and trainers, they would rent rooms out to those guys. And my grandmother had two of them staying with her. She lived on High Street, where she had 6 kids, or 7 kids, so she had plenty of bedrooms space. All the people that lived on the island, their rooms and stuff, they were jockeys. Yes.
You mentioned he died at 70 years of age in 1970. Where did he die from?
And never did hear, probably obesity of it.
He hasn't been in the hospital or anything? Or?
No, he died at home.
Okay.
He died at home. Yes.
Was there ever an amusement park over there? Someone told me there was an amusement park.
Yes, there was at one time. They had the state fair over there for a while. But the amusement park, that moved back to Wheeling Park. And they had a casino, and then like I said, Schmob built one up on top of those. Yeah.
You seem to indicate you felt that the government was wrong in its claim that he was born in Greece.
Yeah, well, they could never prove it. Yeah, they could never prove that he wasn't. So his parents came to the United States in 1896. And like you said, 4 years later, he was born in IC. But it was a midwife, and he wasn't in the hospital or anything. So they didn't have any paperwork to prove that he was there. And also, they didn't have anything to prove that he wasn't. So with Hubert Mckinney,
Where did the Lias caucus come into being as a name? Was it
that was
from Wheeling or from Greece?
That was from Greece.
Okay.
Yeah. And when he changed his name to Lias, I don't know.
You know what caucus means in Greek, don't you?
No.
Evil.
Now, wait a minute now. Leokakos is the Greek name. Excuse me, Leokakos is the Greek name. And of course, many people, when they came to the United States, shortened their name.
Yeah.
And they became Lias, L-I-A-S. But Leokakos is the Greek name.
And that's what they tried to wonder when they had the... In fact, he's the one that brought the suit against the government because he was tired of being harassed for not being born in the United States. But it had that name, a.k.a. William G. Lias, in the proceedings. Yes, ma'am.
You said things. There was a swimming pool down at the racetrack.
Not at the racetrack.
Well, it was outside. It was in the parking lot towards the back.
Right.
And it was in the 40s, right? From 1945. There had been one earlier, and it didn't have a good reputation. I guess he cleaned up. And it was very nice pool, it was always people.
Yes.
As it was compared to the pools, old pools in town. It was very nice. Secondly, I was in school. There were a couple of kids that I knew in my class, and I know my sister who was older in her class. And Mr. Lias employed their father to write numbers. He went door to door,
Oh, yeah.
regular customers.
Yeah.
And he paid him enough to keep his wife in a hospital and have those kids finish school. And I live on the island, and you could tell their cars, they'd be down there till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And these big limousines, you could hear every one of them off the street. They stayed down there for all hours. We heard they were dancing.
And one other thing, when Bill Lias remodeled the Wheeling Down,
Yes.
where the parking lot is now is where all the horse stables were. And behind the grandstand was just cinders to get to the patio. He paid all that, and he put all the administrative offices behind. And back then, the jockeys weighed a lot less. retired weight a lot less than what they are now. They've increased the weights on work weight horses they have to carry. But some of the jockeys that keep their weight down would actually get like in a leather, or not leather, but a rubber suit or plastic suit and get in the horse stuff that was piled up this high to get the heat, so they could lose weight. And Bill Lias, when he built the administrative office, he got hold of Bob's Lumber, Russell Hobbs, and told him he wanted a sweater to put under the top for these jockeys and stuff, which he did. And to watch their weight, one of the leading jockeys in the country, Jerry Bailey, he's retired now, they asked him one time, they said, what are you going to have for lunch? He said, a peanut.
I wanted to ask you, wasn't the person Mrs. Elias killed?
Who?
The person Mrs. Elias?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, she got killed next door.
And he was killed, and then Mike Russell was, I think, accused or suspected.
It was his wife that killed her.
And I didn't know that, but I heard it was Mike Russell, and I heard he was with Gordon Cannon. His brother was down the street from us.
Oh, okay.
The whole family was sent out.
You had said Billy's Club was in South Wheeling, but it was actually in Central Wheeling.
Well, certainly, yeah. It was the Pirate Cafe before they charged Billy. And the name Billy wasn't Bill Lias, it was Billy High. His brother, Walter Powell, was a big official in football.
You know anything about that house on 16th Street, it's in the area where the city wants to tear down village, whatever they're going to build up there. Somebody was in the paper complaining about the Lias house, and it's a beautiful old home. Of course, it's very dilapidated. Was that Bill's?
He was on 15th Street,
I know that the house.
right across from the old,
Why are they, you know anything about why they're calling that house the Lias house?
I don't know, 16th Street, no, I don't know. Because he lived on 15th.
It was in the paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever hear the story that Bill Lias at one time had a whirlpool installed in the Alice apartment? And when the job was done, he made the electricians get in the pool before he could get in it.
I didn't hear that. But I heard it. I didn't know if it was true. Okay. It doesn't surprise me. Yes, ma'am.
This isn't really a question, but it's a comment. It's real easy to romanticize Bill Lias if you don't think about all the people whose lives were ruined by his empires, or about the fact that so many public leaders allow themselves to be corrupted by him.
Well, it's like they had in that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, the ones he killed, they were all made.
Yeah.
But he did corrupt a lot of them. I mean, Wheeling was wide open, it made a lot of money. And people would come to Czars and they bet a lot of money. And there was never any problem that way. Nobody ever got robbed or anything like that because he wanted the reputation of Wheeling. If you came here with money, you were going to leave at the same time with the money. You know, that you wanted them. And he didn't want to be a reputation for that. That's easy.
You were talking about Bill, his seat. He was 5'2", and he was 66 inches around the waist. Now, how I know that is, I don't know whether you people, a lot of you remember, there was a nice restaurant there at 14th Street, and the fellow that went to Pittsburgh to buy his clothes ate him there. So he was up to Pittsburgh and he bought Bill some new underwear. And my mother were having to work there and another lady, and they pulled out the underwear and each of them got in one of the legs. Well, that was the good part. The bad part was they took a picture of that. And when that picture come home and Dad looked at that picture, he says, "You have any idea you may not have much longer to live?" That was the end of the picture.
Well, another thing, he drove a big Cadillac car, and he was so big that he couldn't fit behind the steering wheel. And he had the steering column cut down, and also the pedals extended. And the seat he had so it could move back almost to where the back seat was. And that's very seldom did he drive himself. He always had bodyguards. When he wanted to get a haircut, they said there'd be somebody at the front door, all the windows, and at the back door. he didn't socialize as well.
Hugh,
Yep.
did you by any chance attend the two-day auction?
I was out of town.
What? You
I
were
was
out
out of
there?
town, yeah.
That was something.
Up and over at the time.
Yeah, I was up in Oakley, and I did a story on it. I was up at the Alice Apartments and interviewed his grandson, and there was a lawyer there, and I forget who else, and a photographer and me. I went about 6 o'clock in the evening, because that's what you do when you want to get a story. And, but it was, I was up at the apartment, and so I heard a lot of what you're saying and everything, but it was a big auction, 2 days.
Oh, right, yeah. I accumulated a lot of memorabilia wheeling down. I've got a whole basement full of it. Like these pictures here, that's the way they still do that. But the winning horse that they show you at the finish line and then afterwards, the people holding them. I think I have upwards of 150 of those. And plus I have some other old pictures from old Charleston. This one here, when Wheeling Down started in 1937, that was the first year actually that it was Wheeling Downs. This finish line here is 1938. That's as close as I could get to get one regular year. And this program, I left it in the plastic there. The reason is it's the 1939 also, and it's the two horses that my dad got from over the track, Thunder Lee and Wallace, were in different races. But he didn't own them at that time, but at least I got the name of the horses in the program.
I thought, I got interested in racing there after getting down to Greenwood. Like the grandstand burned down in the late 60s or something, then they built that center block grandstand in like around 70 or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Was that an insurance, was it an insurance job or?
That's one reason it took 5 years for them to get. They went through all that, and then they had a lot of trouble with floods and stuff.
Yeah. That other grandstand opened, what, about 70 or 71 or something like that, or?
Well, the Lias remodeled that, the whole clubhouse, he enclosed it with air conditioning, and he put the 3 towers in, and they called it Little Churchill Downs. He had people working, they would paint the curves, paint everything. Once everything was painted, they just started all over the place. Okay, well, thank you, it's 1 o'clock.
Lunch with books. Lunch with books, that's cooks and cooks and hacks and cracks and yells and sings and rocks and swings and corn and dough. Lunch with books. Lunch with books. At the Ohio County Public Library in Wheeling, West Virginia. It'll make you feel like yodeling. Hey, mostly on Tuesdays at noon. Bring your lunch, we'll provide the pot. And it's all free. Lunch with books. Knowledge is served.